Welcome to the Elements of Success podcast with Johnny Dawson. This is the show that will inspire you to uncover your formula for success so you take charge of your story, overcome life's obstacles, and find fulfillment in all branches of life. With Johnny as your guide, you will break down the science of success and experiment with how you can combine key elements to uncover discipline you need to accelerate your journey towards prosperity. Now, on to today's episode.
Welcome to the Elements of Success podcast, where we will explore traits that have helped others achieve success. Our hope is to inspire you to discover your own element of success. Today, we're joined by my co-host, Eric Johnson. Eric, how are we doing today, man?
I'm doing fantastic. Johnny, I am so excited about this podcast because we talked before the recording a little bit about the story that led to this topic. So first of all, what's the element we're talking about today?
Yeah, so great point, Eric. And I'm super excited to talk about this today on the podcast as well. As anyone that following our social media page knows that we had a big event this past weekend, and going through that event with our son, Titus, our 7-year-old baseball player, and just the adversity we faced that weekend and what he faced, I thought, you know what, let's do a podcast on adversity and use this lesson that we learned with 7-year-olds on how to overcome adversity. And basically the definition of adversity is difficulties or misfortune. And I'm really excited to talk about this with you today as well.
Yeah, I'm actually a little surprised by the second part of that definition, which is misfortune. I've always thought of adversity as difficulties, but to have misfortune tied on there too, that kind of gives it a different twist.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think to realize an adversity, a misfortune has to happen sometimes, right?
Yeah,
so you have to kind of come to the conclusion, I've had this misfortune, now I have adversity. And how do I get through that adversity? And we're about to go through a perfect example. So those that have seen, we played in a baseball tournament this past weekend. So for those listening that don't know, I coach our U7 Colts travel baseball team for our son Titus. And we had our first tournament win this weekend. And it's the first tournament that we've played other teams of kids our age. Usually we'll play in a tournament against 8-year-olds and win 1 or 2 games, but once you get to the championship bracket, those teams are really good.
Yeah.
So this was our first U7 only tournament. And not only that, but this weekend happened to be Titus's first ever career home run in baseball.
Oh,
and it
man.
was during the final match to win the tournament. So to help win the tournament. And let me tell you, I think this is probably going to be one of those memories that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. And it was even caught on video, which is even better.
Nice.
And watching his excitement and pride just running across that home plate. And then we go on to the victory, the celebration, the whole thing following that game was awesome. Those boys played their hearts out. And I think, when I explained the circumstances and the story of what they faced, I really thought it was going to be impossible, honestly, to win the tournament. I don't really kind of project out or think that things will go wrong, or any time in life, we sometimes will look at adversity and it's just a mountain and you're like, I have no idea how I'm going to get over this thing or get to the top of it. That's what I felt Sunday morning. And here's why. So to give you a little bit of background, we came into the playoff bracket with the number 1 seed. So we played 2 games on Saturday, which was really hot as well. So it was 80 plus all day Saturday. We played a doubleheader, back-to-back 2 games. And usually, 7-year-olds don't play a lot of doubleheaders. We may play a couple a season. And we won both of those games, and with double elimination, we were the number 1 seed. So we immediately thought on Sunday we had a bye, so our first game wasn't until 11:45 a.m. on Sunday. And going into that game, we were like, well, this is double elimination. We're the number 1 seed. The victory of this championship should be pretty easy. However, we lost the first game on Sunday. We lost the first playoff game. Here's what I didn't post in any social media posts, but our 9-year-old son, so we lost by 1 run, Eric, 1 run.
Oof.
Our 9-year-old son, he helps out with the dugout, and he will go pick up the bats. You know, if the kids leave the bats on the field, he'll run out, grab the bat, and then run the bat back in the infield. Well, a couple times during our first game, he was warned by the ump to, hey, you can't be out on the field. You got to stay inside the dugout. Well, his little brother, Titus, our other son, was rounding third and heading home to score. The ump stopped Titus and pointed at his older brother and called Titus out because Maddox had been warned not to be on the field. So they called him out, and we ended up losing by 1 run as he was getting ready to score. Talk about feeling defeated. Now,
wow.
I got on Maddox a little bit because obviously when you tell your 9-year-old 15 times to stay off the field, you're going to expect him to stay off the field.
Mm-hmm.
But we didn't let that kind of get to us. So we lost that game. So that meant that we had to win every single game from that point forward to win the championship. Not only that, we had to play every single game back to back. There were no breaks for the entire day. So these boys were already feeling defeated after that loss, and it was approaching around 90 degrees right after the game. So I knew that heat was going to be a factor in this performance. I mean, we're talking about 7-year-olds and playing baseball, and it's hot.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I've helped coach at that level, and after 85 degrees, they melt down. I mean, not just melt, they melt down. So, yeah.
Right.
Wow.
I mean, it was getting hot. And so as we kind of circle the boys up in the outfield, that sort of thing, I decided that let's have a conversation about things we can't control. And the reason why I had this conversation is I remember back in the Marine Corps in combat, there was a particular time that our enemy was never really the enemy. It was the elements around us that were the enemy. It was the 130-degree Iraqi sand blowing in your face while you're in full combat gear with a face mask and goggles and a Kevlar and 60-pound flak jackets. That was extremely exhausting. It was the heat of just mental exhaustion that sometimes was so overwhelming that you didn't even know how you could continue. How is your body going to hold up? At times, I remember, I tell my boys this sometimes, that there was so much salt and just the sweat from the salt in our camis and our clothes and our uniforms that you could literally take off your pants, and if you did it right, you could position your pants because they were so hard from all the salt that they would stand straight up.
Oh, geez.
That's how hot it was at times. But the enemy in combat was dealt with the same element. And one of the things that we tried to always teach, or at least myself would teach our teammates in combat, is whoever performs better in this element that we're both in is going to win. Because the enemy is going to be equally as hot. It's the same heat. It's the same sand. But whichever one of us can outperform the other through that element, through that adversity, that's who's going to win. That was what was going through my head after this first defeat that we had, is I had to somehow change the perspective of these kids away from the opponent and get them focused on, we need to play better in the heat. So obviously I didn't tell this combat Marine story to a bunch of 7-year-olds. I know if you've ever watched the movie Major Payne, he would have definitely have dove into this story.
Yeah.
So I decided, let's just have a conversation about adversity. And we sat the boys down and we said, we're going to change their mindset. The coaches and I did. We're not going to continue to worry about what the opponent's doing. We do not care if they get hits, if they get an out. We just do not care. Every conversation we had from that point forward was about the heat. We changed their perspective to focus on, I'm not hot, I need to play better than they're playing in the heat. And we even started a chant. And the chant was really fun. So anytime that I would come by the dugout or I would get the boys all rallied up, I would say, who plays better in the heat? And the boys would say, nobody. And we'd yell that 2 or 3 times, and then they would take the field. And what I noticed were the other teams, the heat was getting to them. So with all of this being said, after a total of 4 games and 6 hours back to back to back with 15 to 20 minute breaks in between, they did the impossible. They were the best performers in the heat. And after that last game, I just couldn't believe it. And even during that last game, I had a conversation with these little, 7-year-old kids. And I said, listen, guys, we didn't come this far just to come this far in this heat. You guys are playing way better than any other team out here because you have changed your mindset. And the lesson that they learned that day was really not about baseball. It was more about mindset.
Yeah.
And I feel as grown-ups and individuals and anyone listening to this, sometimes we focus our attention on adversities that we really shouldn't be giving attention to. And sometimes we miss the very simplest adversity, that if all you did was change the direction of your perspective and you targeted what is really holding you back, that could change your trajectory and you could potentially find your element of success. It was a simple game of baseball, and heat was the number one adversity that those kids were facing. But sometimes in life, the number one adversities we face isn't what others do to you. It isn't what has been done upon you. Maybe the adversity you face is fear. Maybe the adversity you face is change, that you don't want to make any changes, that going through change is going to give you anxiety, and that's going to create fear in itself. But what if you focus your attention on what you're scared of or what you're afraid to change, and you just work on little tiny steps to get over that? And once you pivot your concentration to figure out what adversity is truly holding you back from your element of success, and you can identify that, and you start working on ways to change it, that's when you'll find success in your own life, whether it's business, personal, fitness, things of that nature. A lot of times in the fitness world, you'll hear people like, oh, I'd love to start a great workout program, but my knee hurts all the time. So instead of working out at all to avoid knee pain, I just don't do it. And to kind of give you a side story of that, I used to love lifting and doing things of that nature after the Marine Corps, but due to just the beat down and injuries from the Marine Corps, my lower back would always hurt. I mean, there would have been days where 3 or 4 days a week, I just couldn't walk because my back hurt. So my chiropractor said, look, you don't want to work out anymore because you're afraid to hurt your back, but why don't you just change what you're doing? He's like, why don't you try cycling? And I thought, well, I've never really tried to cycle. So all I did was pivoted. I worked out in a different way, but I didn't allow the fear of that change or that fear of that pain to get through that adversity. And I think sometimes in life, we got to apply our mindset to target what's really holding us back and then figure out the solution to that adversity. Would you agree?
Oh, 100%. And what I think of a lot, and we've spoken about this before, is I think whether you own your own business or you work inside a business and you're at a level where you kind of are in a leadership position, I think a lot of people face fear of failure, right? And so the fear of failure holds you back from being able to do something. And so instead of saying this project or this thing that I want to accomplish is too difficult, it's not that it's too difficult. It's that we have that fear of failure. We don't want to fail. We don't like that feeling. And so we avoid getting that feeling by avoid even trying to begin with. And I've done that in the past, and it sucks, Johnny. I'll be honest. It is the worst feeling in the world to know that I could have done something. I could have tried something, but because of my own concern or fear of failure or, fear of embarrassment or whatever, I just didn't do it. And I've had a couple of those, and I try to jot those down, make those notations, and I've got a couple note cards that I have to use to kind of remind myself when I come up against something like that. I'll pull one of those out and remind myself how bad it felt not even to try, and then feel like even more of a failure, if that makes any sense at all. But because I feel like I'm more of a failure because I didn't even try. At least if I tried and failed at something, I'll learn something from that lesson, right?
Right.
And so I think a lot of people face that in business, and I know a lot of business owners are listening to this. I would love to hear from them, kind of what helped them get through their adversity.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, and that's our goal, is to continue to bring guests on and use each other. I feel as society has kind of siloed each other's thoughts and opinions to themselves and things of that nature, business owners sometimes do the same. They feel like they can't share their successes because someone else will be successful, and that's a detriment to their failure. And that's not the case. That's honestly why I even wanted to create a podcast of Elements of Success, is to share stories of success from others so that we can all leverage off of each other to become better as a whole. Yeah. And Doug Ulman was on a couple weeks ago, a few episodes ago, and his sense of community and what he has built as a community around Pelotonia and for cancer research is phenomenal. So I'd encourage you to go listen to that episode. But that's what we're trying to create with the Elements of Success, essentially in a community to where we can leverage each other's thoughts and opinions to say, look, you don't have to go down this road alone. We're a community, and we're trying to strive to be better with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, I know that you said this before we even started recording, but I'm glad you got your voice back from all the yelling and screaming and excitement this weekend. I love the story, and boy, I tell you what, hug the boys for me, because that sounds like they just had a fantastic weekend.
Oh, they did. Titus took his, they gave him rings and things for winning the tournament, and
nice.
You couldn't get that thing off of that kid for at least 3 days. He took it to school every day, slept with it. He was on cloud nine for sure. And it's awesome to see that your son has a passion for playing the game of baseball and is having success doing it. And it's one of those things where you just love seeing these boys develop. And there's been a lot of conversations with the parents about, let's not look at stats. We're more here for fundamentals. But at the end of the day, we're trying to create ideas of mindset, because that's what's going to carry them in the future, is how they get through the adversities that they're going to face later in life. And my hope is that one day one of them get to an adversity and they're like, hey, if I accomplished it way back then because my coach said this or did that, I can get through this today too. And that's my hope with their mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Johnny, thank you so much for your time today. This was a fantastic topic, fantastic podcast. As we said, audience, I'm going to say it here in a moment again, but we'd love to hear from you. So reach out to Johnny. He's on all sorts of social media platforms. What's a great way to get a hold of you, Johnny?
Yeah, so, the most that I check often is probably Instagram, and it's just Johnny W. Dawson. It's just my name is the handle for that. So reach out via Instagram, send me a DM if you've got things topics that you would like. Also, our Facebook page, Elements of Success on Facebook, and there's an Element of Success podcast Instagram page as well. Those are the main avenues. Feel free to reach out anytime, send me a message, and I'd be happy to listen to your success stories. And if any adversities come up that I can help with, I'd be glad to do so as well.
Awesome. Johnny, thanks again so much for your time today and the topic. And of course, our last thank you goes to you, the listening audience. Thank you for tuning in and listening to the Elements of Success podcast with Johnny Dawson. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Johnny comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This makes it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at the Elements of Success, this is Eric Johnson asking you this: what adversity have you overcome? Or what are you facing that you could use some advice on? We'd love to hear from you. You have the ways to reach out to Johnny, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Elements of Success podcast. If you have not subscribed to the podcast, please click the subscribe button below. If you know anyone who would benefit from listening to this podcast, click the share button.